The biochemistry of hormones. At the end of this presentation, a student is expected to be able to explain the basic principles of endocrine hormone action, explain what determines the hormone target cell response and the hormone concentration at the target cell, understand the broad diversity and mechanism of action of endocrine hormones, and appreciate the complex steps involved in the production, transport, and storage of hormones. The endocrine system is unique and it is complex. Usually, the substance that is produced in the endocrine system is a hormone. These hormones serve as communicating signals. They are synthesized in one organ, transported by the circulatory system to act on a target tissue. Exemplified in this video is the pancreas. The pancreas produces insulin, but this insulin is secreted upon physiologic cue, and the physiologic cue is hyperglycemia. With hyperglycemia, it will now stimulate the biosynthesis of insulin. This will be secreted and transported into its target cell, and particularly, we are talking about the hepatocyte. The hepatocyte, in turn, will produce glycogen or glycogenesis. This is stimulated. That is the target gland. That is the response that is expected from the hepatocyte by the action of insulin. Several parts of the human body produces hormones. The hypothalamus will be producing regulatory hormones, which affects the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. The anterior lobe of the pituitary gland releases hormones affecting the thyroid, the adrenal glands, and the ovary and/or the testes. Carbohydrate metabolism is important, and the pancreas secretes insulin, glucagon, and somatostatin for carbohydrate equilibrium. The parathyroid gland, although it is small, plays an important role because it secretes the parathyroid hormone important for calcium metabolism. Melatonin from the pineal gland is also recognized. We have the heart also producing natriuretic peptides, which are important for volume and blood pressure maintenance. The adipose tissue and the digestive tract also contributes to the endocrine system, and the kidneys as well. Although known for its excretory function, the kidneys also produces erythropoietin, calcitriol, and the substance renin. Hormones are important for human survival. Humans use hormones as early as in utero life for growth and development under the influence of cytokines, growth factors, somatotropin, sexual hormones, and retinoic acid. Once born, these hormones are needed so that metabolism, homeostasis, and digestion is maintained. For the understanding of the students, this lecture is divided into 3 parts. We will first focus on the target cell response, and then we will focus on the synthesis of the steroid hormones and the polypeptide hormones. The target cell response is determined by a lot of factors. These factors includes the concentration of the hormone at the site of the target gland and, of course, the response of the receptors of the target gland. It is not the presence or absence of a physiologic response that determines a target cell. Rather, it is the presence of a receptor, because sometimes the biochemical or the physiologic response is yet to be determined. Therefore, 2 things influence the target cell response. First would be the concentration of the hormone. This hormone concentration is affected by the rate of synthesis and secretion of the hormones, the proximity of the target cell to the hormone source, the affinity of the hormone to its transport proteins, the conversion of the hormone into an inactive or suboptimally active form, and the clearance of the hormone from the plasma either via metabolism by the liver or excretion in the kidneys. Therefore, as a physician, when faced with problems with either absence or presence of a physiologic response from the target cell, we must look into the biosynthesis and storage of the hormones. We must also consider the proximity of the target cell from the source of the hormone. It is also important to note whether there is a transport protein that will affect the concentration of these hormones from the source. Also, we would like to note whether this hormone is to be converted into an active form in the target cell. And finally, we would like to note the rate of the clearance from the plasma. Furthermore, in understanding the synthesis of hormones, one must remember that steroid hormone synthesis is affected by hormones coming from the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus will be secreting libertins or releasing hormones and statins or inhibiting hormones, which will affect the pituitary gland. In turn, the pituitary gland will secrete tropic hormones that will further affect the glandular hormones coming from the peripheral target gland. So, if a clinician is faced with a problem with the synthesis of mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, sex hormones, even the thyroid hormones, you will not just look at the peripheral gland, but you will also look at the secretions coming from the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus. For example, if you have a patient with signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism, you will not just look at the release of the T3 and the T4 coming from the thyroid gland, but you will also have to look at the release of TSH coming from the anterior pituitary gland and TRH coming from the hypothalamus. It is not just important to know the rate of synthesis of these hormones. There are hormones that are secreted in a variety of ways. For example, is cortisol. Cortisol is secreted periodically. In other words, it is secreted highest at the first early hours in the morning, and then it eventually goes down. How will this affect clinical practice? If you are going to detect the levels of cortisol, you must know that the levels of cortisol are highest expected in the first hours of the morning. Second, there are also hormones that are needed to be secreted in a pulsatile manner so that it will be effective. And this applies for LH and FSH, which is under the influence of GnRH. Also, there are a variety of hormones that are secreted based on an event. For example, insulin is stimulated by meals. Growth hormone is also stimulated by meals. Earlier, it was mentioned that the target cell response is affected by the proximity of the target cell to the hormone source. In other words, if the target cell is far from the source of hormone, the expected physiologic response is slower compared to when the target gland is near the source of the hormone. It is even faster if the target gland is the source of the hormone itself. This is a process that occurs with autoregulation. Transport proteins will also affect the physiologic response. Steroid hormones are fat-soluble. Being fat-soluble, it cannot freely circulate. Thus, it needs transport proteins to circumvent this solubility problem. As long as these hormones are attached to the transport proteins, it will not be metabolized, it will not be secreted, thus serving as a circulating reservoir for these kind of hormones and prolongs the half-life of these hormones. However, the disadvantage is that as long as a hormone is attached to its transport protein, it is not biologically active. The following substances serves as a transport protein for the particular steroid hormone. The sex hormone binding globulin, also known as the testosterone estrogen binding globulin, serves as a transport protein for estrogen, testosterone, and dihydrotestosterone. Looking at progesterone, it doesn't use the same transport protein. Rather, it uses the corticotropin binding globulin together with cortisol and deoxycortisone. If you would notice, aldosterone does not have a specific transport protein but uses albumin together with dehydroepiandrosterone and androstenedione. Thyroid hormones T3 and T4 also has its own transport protein, the thyroxine binding globulin. Now, how will you use this information or this knowledge of biochemistry in clinical practice? If you have a patient with levels of sex hormone binding globulin decreasing, what is the expected physiologic response? If the sex hormone binding globulin is decreased, it will first release estrogen because it has the least affinity for estrogen. Therefore, if a male patient presents with gynecomastia, then you must investigate whether there are conditions that are affecting his sex hormone binding globulin. Thus, there is a hyperestrogenic response. Group 2 hormones have no transport proteins except for insulin-like growth factor 1. The following clinical conditions affect levels of transport proteins. Estrogens and hyperthyroidism will increase the transport protein, whereas androgens, hypothyroidism, liver diseases, and advancing age will decrease it. Let's apply this clinically. If a person is taking an oral contraceptive pill, this oral contraceptive pill has levels of estrogen. Therefore, the effect of the oral contraceptive pill on the sex hormone binding globulin, it will increase the sex hormone binding globulin. If the sex hormone binding globulin is increased, it will attach to testosterone or other androgens first. Therefore, physiologic effect, there will be hypoandrogenism. Do we want this? Depending on why you are giving the oral contraceptive pill. Other non-contraceptive benefits of the oral contraceptive pill is the treatment of acne for an individual. We know that acne is associated with hyperandrogenism. Therefore, if you give a patient with acne an oral contraceptive pill, the oral contraceptive pill will increase the sex hormone binding globulin, will bind to all the testosterone, therefore it will treat the acne. What if a male individual takes the oral contraceptive pill? If a male individual will take the oral contraceptive pill, it will increase the sex hormone binding globulin. There will be hypoandrogenism for that male. Maybe there will be no acne if acne is not the problem, but it will increase the breast size. Why? Because there are now more biologically active estrogen that will act on his breast. Is that good or is that bad? It depends on whether the male individual wants the breast. Okay, let's look at liver diseases. If a patient has cirrhosis, they say, will decrease the levels of the sex hormone binding globulin. If the level of the sex hormone binding globulin is decreased, what will happen? Which one will be released first? Will it be estrogen or testosterone? Obviously, because the sex hormone binding globulin has the least affinity for estrogen, therefore estrogen will be released. This will now explain the presence of gynecomastia among patients with cirrhosis. This also explains the presence of gynecomastia among male with advancing age. Now that we understand that the transport protein will affect hormone concentration, we see that the transport protein holds on to the hormone. Now, when this transport protein brings the hormone to the target gland, how can we be assured that the hormone will be released from the transport and will now go to the receptor? Biochemistry is the answer. The concentration of the receptor is low compared to the concentration of the transport protein. And because of this low concentration, the hormone affinity for the receptor is definitely higher compared to that of the transport protein. Next, the interaction between the hormone and the receptor is highly specific compared to the bonding of the receptor with the transport protein. These three attributes make sure that the hormone will leave the transport protein and will go to the receptor when it reaches the target cell. Because of the low concentration of the receptors, the binding is saturable compared to that of the transport protein in physiologic conditions. Both binding is reversible, and only the hormone receptor interaction will affect signal transduction. That of the transport protein will not, because as we've mentioned earlier, as long as the hormone is bound to the transport protein, it is not biologically active. Another factor that will affect the concentration of the hormone is how it was released. If the hormone is released in the final form, then the concentration to the target gland is high. Among those who are released in the final form would be the steroid hormones, catecholamines, T3 and T4. Look at T3 and T4. T3 and T4 are synthesized in the final form but is stored in the thyroglobulin. Once there is a physiologic cue for release, it doesn't have to process anymore. All it has to do is do exocytosis and T3 and T4 will be released. The same thing is true for catecholamines. Catecholamines are synthesized in the final form but are stored in vacuoles, the chromaffin granules in the adrenal medulla. Once there is a cue for the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine, then immediate exocytosis. So, what is the difference between catecholamines, T3 and T4, and the steroid hormones? Physiologic response-wise, physiologic response is faster and sustained for catecholamines and T3 and T4 because they already have the final product. All they have to do is release it. Compared to the synthesis of aldosterone, hydrocortisone, even estradiol and testosterone. It takes a while because the physiologic cue will still tell the peripheral gland, the source of the hormone, to process it and then release it. There are also hormones that are released or synthesized in a precursor protein form. So, comparing the final form and the precursor protein form, physiologic response is faster for those that are synthesized and released in the final form. Look here at T3 and T4. Ano ba talaga, Dr. Elenzuela? Is it released in the final form or is it released in a precursor protein form? Between T3 and T4, the biologically active form is T3. At the peripheral gland, T4 has to be converted by the ionase to T3 so that it will become biologically active. Therefore, between T3 and T4, physiologic response is faster for T3 than T4. In fact, some authorities consider T4 as a pre-hormone. Metabolism of a hormone will also affect the concentration of that hormone at the target cell. Polypeptide metabolism involves several processes like cleavage of disulfide bonds, degradations by exopeptidases and proteinases, or even endocytosis by the membrane receptors. Please take note. Metabolism does not always mean deactivation, as we have mentioned with several other hormones. Steroid hormone metabolism also involves several processes. It can involve conjugate formation, reduction, oxidative cleavage, oxidation, and even conjugate formation. Sometimes it will also involve hydroxylation. Now, just like polypeptide hormones, metabolism does not always mean deactivation. Example, the steroid hormones. All of the steroid hormones come from cholesterol. The first step is the conversion of cholesterol to pregnenolone via the action of the side chain cleavage enzyme. Once pregnenolone is produced, pregnenolone is further degraded to become progesterone, the first active hormone from cholesterol. In the synthesis of the other steroid hormones, the parent hormone is progesterone. When you metabolize progesterone, you can end up producing sex hormones like testosterone and estradiol. You could also end up producing glucocorticoids like cortisol and mineralocorticoids like aldosterone. So this is a clear example of steroid hormone metabolism, progesterone metabolism to another active hormone. Focusing on testosterone. Testosterone can be metabolized in two ways, via oxidation or via reduction. With oxidation, we use aromatase enzyme and we produce 17 ketosteroids like estradiol and androstenediol. Via reduction, we use reductase and we produce dihydrotestosterone, which is a potent hormone. What is the so-called extraglandular testosterone metabolism? As we know, the adrenal gland, the ovary, and even the testes will be producing androgen. One androgen would be androstenedione. Androstenedione from the adrenal gland and from the ovary can be brought to the skin, to the adipose tissue, where it also has an aromatase enzyme. And once the aromatase enzyme acts on the androstenedione, it produces estrone. This estrone can also be metabolized to become estradiol. So when we talk about extraglandular metabolism, we're talking about metabolism of a substance outside of the gland. For example, metabolism of testosterone out of the adrenal gland, which is the skin and the adipose tissue. Metabolism of the androstenedione from the ovary out of the ovary, again at the skin and the adipose tissue. And this extraglandular metabolism is biochemically and clinically important. Extraglandular metabolism of testosterone means that there is an interconversion between androstenedione and testosterone to become estrone and estradiol. This takes place in skin, in the liver, in the adipose tissue, and even in the brain. It is important to note that men do not have receptors for testosterone in the brain. Women do not have receptors for testosterone in the brain. For brain action, comprehension, memory, cognition, it is only estrogen receptor that is present. Therefore, for testosterone to be used by the brain for cognition in men, it has to be converted to estrogen using the aromatase enzyme. So does that mean mas matalino ang babae kaysa lalaki? This extraglandular metabolism of testosterone favors the formation of estradiol and estrone. This reduces the biological activity of testosterone, but it brings the presence of estradiol and estrone, which is important for a woman. Because testosterone metabolism produces ketosteroids, we now know that estrogens come from testosterone. Therefore, biochemically, estrogen of women comes from testosterone. Androstenedione is the source for estrone. It is acted upon by the aromatase enzyme forming estrone. Testosterone is acted upon by the aromatase enzyme to produce estradiol, and estrone is converted also to become estriol. Clinical application. We now understand that aromatase is important for the conversion of testosterone to estrogen. What happens if aromatase is deficient? If aromatase is deficient, therefore, in utero, this fetus will have a lot of testosterone. The absence of the aromatase enzyme now exposes the fetus into high levels of estrogen. If the fetus is male, it's not a problem. But if the fetus is female, then this external genitalia exposing it to a lot of estrogen will become virilized. These are the so-called disorders of sexual differentiation. We have here a virilized female with clitoromegaly and labial fusion. Another application of the knowledge of the aromatase enzyme. Although we don't want it absent, there are conditions when we want it inactivated, thus the birth of aromatase inhibitors. When you have a drug that stops the aromatase enzyme, what is the net effect? Because the drug stops the aromatase enzyme, therefore, the conversion of testosterone to become estrogen is now inhibited. So you will have low estrogen, you will have high testosterone. When do you want this to happen? You want this to happen if you don't want biochemical or clinical activity of estrogen. Where is that? When you have a patient with breast cancer, when you have a patient with myoma, when you have a patient with endometriosis. Okay? Is this true? Not for prostatic cancer. This is wrong. Okay? This is wrong. Not for prostatic cancer. Can we use aromatase inhibitors for prostatic cancer? The answer is no. Why? Because there will be elevated levels of testosterone and we don't want that. The second way to metabolize testosterone is via reduction, using the 5-alpha reductase enzyme, thus producing dihydrotestosterone. Some people consider testosterone to be a pre-hormone. Why? Because testosterone has to be converted to dihydrotestosterone in the target cell, the primary target cell, which is. Why do researchers think that testosterone is a pro-hormone? Why? Because studies have shown that dihydrotestosterone is more active than testosterone. Remember signal transduction. This is the cell membrane. This is the nuclear membrane. This is the DNA. We have here the androgen receptors. The androgen receptors. The androgen receptor will bind to the androgen response element. Studies have shown that comparing testosterone to testosterone converted to dihydrotestosterone, this androgen receptor has a higher affinity for dihydrotestosterone than testosterone. Second, the androgen response element has a higher affinity for the dihydrotestosterone receptor complex than the testosterone receptor complex. Thus, the thinking that dihydrotestosterone is really the active hormone. Now that we've discussed factors that affects the hormone concentration at the target gland, now look at factors that affect the receptor and at the receptor. The concept of the target cell receptor is very important. There are so many substances in the extracellular fluid. How will the target cell know if it will respond to a hormone or if it will respond to a neurotransmitter? This response is defined by the receptor. Receptors are cell-associated recognition molecules which provides a high degree of discrimination to a cell. Therefore, it tells the cell when to respond, how to respond. For hormone receptor interactions to be physiologically relevant, the binding must be specific, the binding must be saturable, and the binding must occur within the concentration range of the expected biologic response. These receptors are located in the plasma membrane, and these receptors can be outside of the plasma membrane, transmembranal, or membrane spanning. Generally, receptors will have two domains, the recognition domain, which binds to the hormone, and the coupling domain, which stimulates signal transduction. Hormone receptor interaction initiates coupling, and coupling occurs in two general ways. Either the hormone binds to the plasma membrane receptors and it generates second messengers so that various intracellular functions, usually phosphorylation, will occur. And the second way is that the hormone will interact with intracellular receptors, form hormone receptor complex attached to the hormone response element, transcription, translation, physiologic response. We have discussed this last year in signal transduction. There are several classes of receptors. We have intracellular receptors and we have G protein receptors, transmembranal receptors, even ion gate channel receptors. Obviously, intracellular receptors are located either in the nucleus or in the cytoplasm, and they activate transcription, which is used by steroid hormones. We've also discussed about the G protein receptors used by trophic hormones, usually uses cyclic AMP, cyclic GMP, calcium and phosphatidylinositides. There are also transmembranal receptors with an intrinsic enzyme activity like tyrosine kinase for insulin, insulin-like growth factor 1 and epidermal growth factor, and serine kinase for activin and inhibin. Some transmembranal receptors do not have an intrinsic enzyme activity like that for prolactin and the growth hormone. Some receptors are also associated with ion gate channels, like the receptors for acetylcholine. Looking at the insulin receptor is a heterotetramer. It has an alpha subunit and a beta subunit. The alpha subunit is extracellular and the beta subunit is the one that spans the membrane, and this is the one that transduces signal through tyrosine kinase. So what now determines the target cell response, aside from the hormone concentration? How will the target cell respond? It depends on the number and occupancy of the receptor. It depends on whether the hormone has to be activated at the target cell, whether there are other factors within the cell that are important for the hormone response. It is also dependent on upregulation or downregulation of receptors and post-receptor desensitization. What other factors are we talking about? Example would be for the thyroid hormone and for the glucocorticoid hormone. We see here several other factors. We have discussed this in signal transduction, and we know that heat shock proteins inactivate receptors for glucocorticoid. Also, we need co-activator proteins, and we need the release of co-repressor proteins so that the thyroid hormone and the glucocorticoid hormone can exert its physiologic response. Therefore, comparing glucocorticoids and thyroid hormones with estrogen and testosterone, which does not need co-activators and co-repressor proteins, then the physiologic response will be faster. Why? Because the thyroid hormone is attached directly already to the DNA. It needs something to stop that physiologic response. Otherwise, we will have patients always presenting with hyperthyroidism. Glucocorticoid receptor is also strong. This produces hyperglycemia, and we don't want that. Therefore, we want co-repressor and co-activator proteins for it too. The number of the receptor can be upregulated and downregulated. One example here is the upregulation. The hormone itself can cause and stimulate the cell to upregulate the number of receptors. Example here would be the follicular stimulating hormone. The follicular stimulating hormone attaches to the granulosa cell, and it stimulates the production of a lot of receptors for the FSH. And the follicle with the highest number of receptors for FSH will be the chosen follicle. Downregulation can also occur if there is an excessive level of hormone or occupancy of that receptor. Then high levels of hormone will stimulate downregulation of the receptors. How will downregulation occur? Downregulation will occur via post-receptor desensitization. Normally, when the hormone binds to the receptor, the hormone will now be endocytosed by the endosome. And once it is endocytosed, it will be degraded via the lysosome. That is the process of downregulation. However, it is not as simple as that. What do we see here? We see here the steps of post-receptor desensitization of the cell. The hormone attaches to the receptor. The hormone-receptor complex is formed. There will now be a pit that would be formed. Eventually, this will now be a receptosome where we have a receptor engulfed by the lysosome. So during the time that there is endocytosis and there is lysis of that hormone and the receptor, there will be no receptors present in the cell surface until these receptors are generated, and these receptors are again formed outside of the cell. What is the clinical significance of that? There are medications, hormonal medications, that use this principle so that they can treat patients, like GnRH. The gonadotropin-releasing hormone is a hormone that affects FSH and LH. End result, there will be increased levels of estrogen. Now, some medications, we have the GnRH receptor analogs. These are hormones that will attach to the receptor, and it will oversaturate the receptor, thus activating desensitization, occupying. Therefore, there will come a time that there will be no estrogen produced because there will be no receptor because it is still being processed. So that is the clinical application. At the end of this discussion, we initially looked at the pancreas responding to the physiologic response, which is hyperglycemia. We come to know that physiologic response is determined by the hormone concentration and the receptor. The beta cells of the islets of Langerhans will be producing insulin, and this insulin will now act on the hepatocyte. In the hepatocyte, it is supposed to stimulate glycogenesis. And how will it do that? It will have to attach to the receptor, thus promoting glycogenesis. Disease will happen if there will be no physiologic response. No physiologic response in type 1 diabetes because there is no insulin produced. No physiologic response in type 2 diabetes because the receptor did not act. Thus emphasizing the importance of understanding these principles so that you will be able to understand and treat the clinical deficiency of the patients. We now come to the end of part 1. We will have part 2. This can be downloaded in your Moodle. The beauty of synchronous and asynchronous learning is here. You have time to listen to the first part of the lecture, take down notes. If you have questions, then we will answer it during the lecture hour. The biochemistry of hormones.